Well, let's talk a little bit about sort of your media side. You have your YouTube channel as well as maybe we'll start with the business, the backgrounds. Can you tell us about what that is and how you started it?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, when we were on that same herp trip that I was with Ricky, I was with Luke and Tyson as well. And we were actually in Gilleneye habitat in a specific spot. And we just found the lizard. And I was looking around and I was like, how can I bring this home with me? Like I'm soaking up the habitat. I'm trying to soak up as much information as I can, but I don't have a way to like bring this habitat home. I'm sure you could probably take a couple of logs or something if you wanted to drive 3 days to go and pick them up and then 3 days home. But that's just not in everybody's cards. And at the time, I was actually getting ready to refit this kind of corner with all these monitor enclosures, and I'd started to kind of work on the Gilleneye habitats, where essentially I just painted the back walls blue, like it was like kind of like a bit of a sky scene, and I'd made some clouds and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, that just looks like garbage compared to looking at the image of the habitat. So I simply just started taking photos of the habitat, and I was like, this is awesome. And then we were sitting in the car. We had a big drive to go after that, so I was kind of just spitballing with Tyson and Luke, and I was like, it'd be great to get these images printed up into a large scale to put them inside of the terrariums or the vivariums and be able to use that. Tyson's always got great arguments for me. He's a very thinking man. He's a big believer in lots of like backgrounds, like 3D backgrounds and stuff like that, as far as like usable space goes. And I completely agree with him for most species. But for the Gilleneye, that essentially living in these little tiny thin tree hollows, they don't exactly have like a big rock escarpment behind them that they're going and climbing up. So I kind of wanted to replicate what they were in nature, where they're kind of potentially just using a few trees that they kind of go between. So yeah, I started up contacting a few different businesses and seeing if I could print my own backgrounds and stuff for my reptile room. And after I did the Gillens, I was like, I need one for the Kimbo. I had that image too after being on a herp trip. Kind of printed that off, made a bunch of mock rock rocks and stuff like that to go alongside it, because obviously they're a rock monitor. Okay, we'll do the Tristis too, and before I knew it, I'd kind of filled the room with all these images that I'd taken. And all these people started contacting me going, where'd you get those backgrounds? Where'd you get those backgrounds? And I was like, well, as far as like a business goes, it's not a hard business to necessarily do, because if I've got the images, I've got friends in the herp community that go out and take images and stuff like that. So why don't I look at potentially setting up a small business, just like a little auxiliary business to my usual daily sort of stuff, getting these backgrounds printed and kind of just working with people alongside the species that they have and what sort of image that they have. And we can post them to them, and then they can use them to put them in their enclosure. So to kind of describe the product itself, essentially it's a really high quality vinyl that's like a low tack vinyl. And essentially it's a giant sticker that go into your background, into your enclosure, and you can kind of cut it to size as far as your enclosure goes. And they're very easy to kind of work with. And for me, this is something that, there's other businesses out there that are printing directly onto enclosures and things like that, which is fantastic. I think some of those look awesome, but if somebody decides that they're going to change the species that's in that enclosure, or an animal dies and they're going to put something in there, they're stuck with that image in that background. So for me, having something that you could take in or out and post in a poster tube around the world versus a whole flat pack enclosure or something like that was just another option. And, it's not necessarily for everybody, and I agree, that's okay too, but there's a lot of people that get use out of this. So for me personally, like if we kind of bring it right back to trying to talk about like time management in a collection, if you actually look inside of my enclosures, the decor and stuff's pretty simple, so that I can kind of work around all of that. But the enclosures themselves look more appealing and visually appealing, because they do have these printed backgrounds in there. It kind of gives more for the eye, more for the lizard's eye. Like, I'm not sure if there's many studies out there that have been done on, if a lizard's just in a black box or a white box or a glass box, like, what are they getting out of that visually? At least here they've kind of got a range of colors that are a bit more natural, to kind of look at. I don't know how they see them necessarily, but it might just be that it's, a little bit more closer to their habitats. But yeah, that's what it kind of started.
Sure. I mean, there's obviously color. That's one thing. Lots of green and blue, and we know that they can see color. So I'm sure that has some effect on them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fantastic now too. I've kind of gotten to a point where I've sent some to Belgium, I've sent some to Canada, I've sent them to the USA, I've sent them kind of all over the world. There's a lot of people out there that are keeping Australian species in particular that don't have access to their sort of background images per
So
se. So,
is the back like, has an adhesive on it, or how does it
yep,
stick? Oh, it does.
yes,
Okay.
yep. So if you imagine like, you know how people wrap cars in vinyl,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
or they do vinyl signage on a building. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. But just the quality that we're using and the durability of it means that if a frill neck decides to jump against it and slide down with his nails, he's not tearing it up. He's not doing any of that, and it's protected from UV with some of the laminate that goes over it. It's made to be there for years on the side of a building in sunlight. So
Right.
if it can handle that, it can handle a reptile enclosure.
Yeah, well, I think in my opinion, I think it does look really stunning. I mean, when you walk through your room, they look like windows rather than enclosures, which I think is what draws your eye to them. And I know people. I was just having a conversation with a listener not that long ago, and she was like, I don't like those because they don't seem very functional. And she was a lot more like utilitarian with her enclosures. Like I like to have shelves and everything, which I totally
Yep,
understand as well. But I think there are ways that you can implement a 3D element into those backgrounds to make them
100%.
usable, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like Tyson just did an awesome enclosure where he essentially built a 3D background into the back of it, but then the two side panels are kind of like forest images. So he put it in for a green tree snake. So the green tree snake's now got the full use of the background as he loves, and then he's also got that visual of both the side panels now look like a forest that he's in. It's the same as like my Kimberley rock monitor tank. That's full of mock rock, like
Yeah.
stacked to the gills with mock rock, but it's got that image around the back of it. So they're still using every bit of rock that's in there, just as they would in the wild, but then they've also got that image around there. So it depends on the type of keeper you are, but at the same time, there's no reason you can't merge them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it looks great. And like you said, there's some species that aren't going to be using a 3D background anyway, or maybe the decor in front is enough for that they don't need that. But yeah, it adds such an interesting element, which is funny because when you think back into like the 90s of aquarium, fish keeping, they would always send you like your fish tank would come with these horrid backgrounds that never looked good. It would always like so corny. And I feel like there's been a lag in the reptile world because of that. Like you think, no, don't put an image on the back. It's just going to look stupid. But it doesn't. It looks, I mean, I think it matters on the quality of the image and making sure that the perspective is right. But for some reason, it looks so much better than anything that you would have seen back with the fish tanks. It's crazy.
yeah, 100%. One thing that I've definitely noticed is a lot of venomous people seem to love them. So when I'm talking to clients and stuff, they'll be like, "Oh, this is for a palehead snake. This is for this species of brown snake or something like that." Because obviously, a lot of venomous keepers probably keep a reasonably simple enclosure so they could work around the actual species. But
Mm.
then by having the option to put something in there, that plain box just goes from being plain into something that looks half decent. Even if it's for the kept and the keeper. It's just that little bit more aesthetically pleasing, but still completely functional for being able to be safe around those venomous animals. So yeah, as I say, like it's not necessarily for everybody. A lot of skink keepers, like a lot of blue tongues. I've done like a lot of blue tongue enclosures now because they don't tend to climb as much as a lot of other species and things. They're a bit more ground dwelling. So yeah, as I say, it's not necessarily for everybody, but at the same time, you can make it work with whatever you want to do. You can still put big branches in front of it. You can still put rocks in front of it. You can merge the rock into the background. I've seen it all done. It's cool to see it all being done too, and just seeing that kind of marriage in between mock rock walls and something that's aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, yeah. It's your eye responds well to it anyway. And so if somebody is just they want to do that, is there like certain sizes they come in, or do they give a custom size? I mean, I'm sure lots of people the back wall is going to be pretty universal for many people.
You'd think so, right? So for me, I noticed I did like kind of like a big order when I first started up the business where I ordered like 20 of the most generic sizes. I thought, 2 foot enclosure with all three walls wrapped, 3 foot, 4 foot, just kind of like your standard off the shelf kind of enclosures. And I sat on those backgrounds for so long because
Oh,
everybody was contacting me going, "Oh, I want this image, but this size. I want this image in this size." And, "Oh, what have you got in that would work for whatever species?" And So that's where I kind of learned. I was like, you know what? It's more of like kind of like a custom go-to thing where I just have to work with the person and figure out what they want, and we'll get them exactly what they want. So, like for example, I had a stock image sitting in the shelf over there that was sort of okay for a brevicorder, but the client was kind of like, no, I just really want like good sand dunes with spin effects. Sweet, I got that as an image. So he didn't buy the one off the shelf, but now he's bought one for a gill and eye and one for a brevicorder now, just to kind of make it worth his while as far as postage and everything goes. And you know, he placed that order last night, and that'll get underway this week. So it's just talking to people about what they're keeping, what they want to expect out of it, you know. And I'm kind of getting to the point now too where I've got a few herpers that are kind of coming on board. So when they're out herping, if I can't get out and take images all the time, they're kind of getting on board where they might kind of get like a little bit of a kickback for using some of those images that they get while they're out there too.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I think that's a great business model. You have so many amazing Australian herpers that you see all the time that are often very good photographers as well. So you might as well, and that's going to be the easiest photo they take all day is just taking a picture of the landscape.
100%. Yeah. I'm not a good photographer by any means. I'm definitely learning a bit recently about different styles and kind of just making things better quality. But at the same time, some of these guys with great cameras, great gear, great know-how, like they can take a good habitat shot.